Hi, everyone. Welcome to WION Live Broadcast, a co-production with A Voice of America, live from New York. I'm Susan Tehrani. Let's go straight into our first story, which is about the upcoming elections and the two main candidates. U.S. presidential candidates Joe Biden and Donald Trump both say that America needs a strong military. Biden says the U.S. military is strong today. Trump says Biden has weakened a U.S. military that Trump himself has rebuilt as president. VOA correspondent Scott Stern has the story.
President Joe Biden told graduates of the U.S. Military Academy that America has never asked its military to do so many different things in so many different places all at once.
Right now, American soldiers are supporting brave Ukrainians in their fight for freedom. Our soldiers are working around the clock to keep munitions and equipment moving by land, sea, and air.
Those commitments include the Middle East.
The U.S. Air Force has conducted food drops, delivering tens of thousands of meals to the people of Gaza. In the face of Iran's recent unprecedented attack on Israel, we brought partners together, including Arab nations, to repel the sustained assault.
Donald Trump says Biden is leading America's military into a, quote, insanely dangerous situation.
Our country has been totally humiliated, and we have a corrupt, compromised president, crooked Joe Biden, who is dragging us into World War III, and that's what's happening.
Trump says Biden should not be risking war with Russia or China. In a campaign video, he promised to put the U.S. military behind a foreign policy that puts America's interests first.
I will ask Europe to reimburse us for the cost of rebuilding the stockpiles sent to Ukraine, which they should be doing now, but Joe Biden is too weak and too disrespected to even ask.
Biden says America's military is strengthening alliances and investing in deterrence.
Defending our values by standing up to tyrants and safeguarding the peace by protecting freedom and openness. Thanks to the U.S. Armed Forces, we're doing what only America can do. As the indispensable nation, the world's only superpower, and the leading democracy in the world.
The U.S. Defense Department says Army, Navy, and Air Force recruitment in fiscal year 2023 missed targets by more than 40,000 recruits. Trump says that's because many people do not want to serve in the U.S. military because of what he called Biden's, quote, woke policies and political purges.
I will restore the proud culture and honor traditions of America's armed forces, and there will be no Marxism allowed, no communism allowed, and we'll get rid of the fascists.
The U.S. military says there are several reasons for dropping recruitment, including a stronger economy, which gives younger people more options, and a greater mistrust of institutions among those in Generation Z, born between 1997 and 2012. Scott Stearns, VOA News.
In 2020, Black voters in Philadelphia and across our nation helped President Biden and me win the White House. Yes, you did.
The White House described an Israeli airstrike on a refugee camp in Rafah as, quote, heartbreaking, but it made no move to limit military assistance to Israel or shift its policies supporting the country's right to conduct operations in Gaza. Anita Powell from VOA reports from the White House.
These are the scenes the White House describes as heartbreaking. The aftermath of an Israeli airstrike that killed at least 45 people crammed into a displaced persons camp in Rafah.
Even the safe area that the enemy said is safe is not safe. Even Rafah has no safety. It is known that this is a displaced camp. All of these were martyrs. To be honest, it is a scene that cannot be comprehended. Last night was very difficult.
President Joe Biden has repeatedly warned Israel against launching a ground operation in the crammed southern Gaza city. But the White House stressed Tuesday that it doesn't believe that the weekend's airstrikes crossed the administration's red line or warranted a policy shift.
We have been, I think, very strident in our condemnations about the deaths of innocent civilians. These deaths are not excused from that. But we have to understand what happened here. There's going to be an investigation. They've already said it was a tragic mistake. They're looking into it. They have been able to investigate themselves and hold people accountable in the past. We'll see what they do here.
Israel's military said it was investigating the incident.
In a war of such scope and intensity, difficult incidents also occur. Some of the incidents, like last night's incident in Rafah, are very difficult. The details of yesterday's event are still under review, and we are committed to seeing it through to its conclusion. The IDF regrets any harm to uninvolved civilians during the war.
But the militant group Hamas, which sparked this conflict with its October 7th attack on Israel, was quick to lay blame.
We hold the American administration and its President Biden personally fully responsible for this ugly massacre against the displaced in Rafah and for all the crimes by the occupation in the Gaza Strip. And that is through continuing to provide political and military cover for the occupation and continuing to supply it with military equipment, bombs and ammunition that killed dozens if not hundreds of children, women and civilians daily.
Israel's action in Gaza, which has led to the deaths of more than 35,000 people, according to the Hamas-run Gaza Health Ministry, has been condemned by several U.S. allies. Humanitarian agencies, including the United Nations Refugee Agency in Gaza, are demanding a ceasefire. As investigators try to untangle what happened in Rafah, analysts say the Biden administration is under major pressure.
While they are facing a lot of blowback from the left flank of their party, they also don't want to alienate centrist voters and pro-Israel Democrats. And so the Biden administration has sort of been caught in between here, and that makes the politics of this all very tricky for the Biden administration to navigate.
While the powers that be figure this out and the conflict drags on, these are the people paying the price. Anita Powell, VOA News, the White House.
VOA's Jessica Stone is now joining us live from the White House. Jessica, great to see you. This investigation that's into the attacks on Rafah, where does it stand at this point? And is Washington playing a role?
They are playing a role, and Washington is urging Israel to do this investigation and watching it very closely. Israel claims that its munitions, though, could not have caused this, the damage that we saw and the civilian deaths that we saw because its munitions were simply too small. And so they are now investigating, according to the IDF spokesperson, the possibility that Hamas was storing some munitions nearby, not far from the civilian camps that ultimately paid the price for the attack. And that is ongoing. But Slovenia's deputy UN ambassador says this is not the only occasion where there have been civilian deaths at the hands of Israeli attacks or nearby, and says we should still have some reports from those, and we are waiting for those investigations to be complete, indicating some impatience on the part of people at the United Nations about the status of these investigations. Meantime, Algeria has been circulating a draft resolution at the United Nations to call for an immediate halt for Israel's war in Gaza, and specifically in Rafah. Israel says, though, that it cannot do so because if it allows any remnants of Hamas to stay in the Gaza Strip, it will mean attacks down the line for Israeli citizens, and so it says it needs to protect them. Meantime, Washington is focused on pushing Netanyahu's government to really come up with a plan, and they have yet to do this, about what happens after the war, essentially needing an incentive for Hamas and for the Palestinian Authority to have some idea what the end game is here in terms of governance for the Palestinian people and for the refugees.
And this port that the military port off the Gaza coast, that the U.S. had set up has been temporarily removed this week for repair. How is that impacting aid delivery for the people of Gaza?
Yeah, so it was just in operation for 2 weeks, Susan. There was a number of trucks, over 100 trucks, that were able to make it across the pier and deliver aid, more than 900 million tons, in fact, according to the United Nations. But this pier system was damaged earlier this week in a storm, and it has been deconstructed. The parts that are broken have been removed, and it's been taken back to U.S. Central Command for repair. Pentagon spokesperson saying that they expect to have it fully operational in a little more than a week, but obviously this is definitely slowing down the delivery of humanitarian aid to those refugees.
Okay. And Jessica, big news coming in last night regarding that hush money case involving the former president. His criminal trial has concluded now in New York City. Jurors have issued a guilty verdict against Donald Trump on all 34 counts. Is this going to play out favorably, unfavorably on the campaign trail? What impact will it have?
Well, so far we've only seen a public and visceral reaction from the Donald Trump campaign. The president continuing with the narrative that he is a victim of political maneuvering and electoral tampering, and certainly he has continued to take that position, as have his supporters. He is portraying himself as that. But meantime, here at the White House, President Biden is still in Delaware, and we will not see him make any public appearances until later this afternoon, and that is the only opportunity we will have to see him speak publicly or get a question publicly about this. The Biden campaign has ramped up a little bit of its rhetoric with respect to the president, former President Trump's trial and the results. They have said that no one is above the law by statement, and Robert De Niro, the American actor famous for Goodfellas and The Godfather, he made some statements outside the courthouse this week. He is also narrating a campaign commercial on behalf of the Biden campaign, in which he too is basically saying that to re-elect Donald Trump would be to re-elect a dictator, and that there's no secret about that. So we've had some around the edges statements, but no public statement yet from the sitting president about his opponent in this year's presidential election, now being a convicted felon who will have a sentencing just 4 days before the Republican National Convention takes place here in the United States, giving him the nomination, the official nomination, to be the Republican nominee for president. And of course, U.S. law does not prevent him from taking office, from him continuing to run. It does do one thing, though, to curtail his activities with respect to voting, and that is that a sitting president who is also a convicted felon cannot vote. So we will not be able to see Donald Trump vote for himself this go round. Susan?
Oh, that's very interesting. We had an extraordinary report by your colleague Scott Stearns about the U.S. military. I just want to wrap up with this about President Biden. He ran a campaign to end the so-called forever wars in 2020, but he's now supporting 2 conflicts in Ukraine as well as the Middle East. So how is that playing out on the campaign trail?
Yeah, it's a tricky needle to thread, so to speak, for President Biden, because the Biden campaign has really taken to focusing on domestic policy, specifically the economy, health care, taking care of student loans for students, abortion rights, which are a very mobilizing issue for many American voters. But they are not focusing on foreign policy issues, despite supporting additional aid going to both Ukraine and to Gaza and even to Taiwan. These are not campaign issues that have been successful for any president, because most Americans don't vote based on foreign policy issues. But in particular, the Biden administration is really at a crossroads within the Democratic Party. There's a number of people who do not support the war in Gaza and the Biden administration's position on that. He is using the narrative that he is defending democracy, both to counter Donald Trump's campaign, arguing that he is not a defender of democracy, and also justifying his own increase of aid to these parts of the world and to the war efforts there. But a Reuters Ipsos poll early May says 32% of Americans approve of the Biden handling of the war in Gaza, and 44% of those are Democrats. We also know that Joe Biden has an overall approval rating in May, according to a Reuters Ipsos poll. It's the lowest that it's been in 2 years, and much of the American population does say that it is going to vote based on the economy, and the perception is, not necessarily the reality, that the economy is not in a good place here in the United States.
Jessica Stone, live from the White House. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you so much for those thorough analyses on all of these stories that made headlines this week.
You bet.
For all the latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.